The late afternoon sun burned low over Sweetwater, Texas, casting long shadows across the dusty auction yard. The wooden bleachers creaked under the weight of ranchers and buyers, most silent, their hats pulled low to block the glare. The smell of dirt, sweat, and old leather hung in the air, familiar and heavy. Hank Donovan, a stooped man in his early 70s, led a tired-looking chestnut horse toward the center ring. His back was stiff, his boots dragging slightly. The animal at his side, Rusty, looked just as worn, ribs showing, eyes cloudy with age. But there was a softness in his step, a gentleness that time hadn't touched. Hank didn't want to be here. He had put this off as long as he could. Rusty had been with him through too many seasons, too many memories. But the ranch was bleeding money, and the bank wasn't waiting. Selling Rusty was the last option before the land, his family's land, was taken. He kept his gaze low as the auctioneer tapped the mic and started the bidding at $200. A few men chuckled. No one moved. Rusty wasn't a workhorse anymore. To most of them, he was just old weight, barely worth the feed. Then came the voice. "Grandpa." It was sharp, emotional. Amelia Donovan, Hank's 16-year-old granddaughter, burst through the crowd, face flushed, eyes shining with disbelief. She pushed her way to the edge of the ring, then stepped over without hesitation. "You promised," she said, breath-catching. "You said he'd stay with us forever." Her voice trembled, but her feet held firm. Hank's jaw tightened. He hadn't meant for her to find out like this. Especially not here. Amelia walked up to Rusty and placed a hand on his head. The horse leaned into her palm, calm and still. The crowd hushed. "If no one here sees his worth," she said clearly, "then none of you deserve him." Her words didn't tremble this time. A few men shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Hank felt the sting in his chest. She had grown into her mother's spirit. Ruth's fire lived in her eyes. Before he could speak, another voice rose from the crowd. Older, familiar. That horse. Did Ruth raise him? Silence fell like a hammer. Hank turned slowly toward the sound, his breath caught. A man stepped forward, weathered, gray, but unmistakable. Walter McCree, a name buried deep in Hank's past. Their eyes locked for the first time in decades. And in that moment, everything Hank thought he had buried came rushing back. Hank stared at Walter McCree like he was seeing a ghost in broad daylight. The last time they'd been face to face, the war had still been fresh in their bones and Ruth was alive, the bridge between two men who'd once been brothers in everything but blood. Walt looked older, of course, more weathered than Hank remembered, but his eyes were still sharp, still digging for answers. No one had mentioned his name in Sweetwater for nearly 30 years, and now here he stood, in the middle of the auction yard, like time had looped back on itself. "I didn't come here to stir trouble," Walt said, hands raised in peace. "I just saw that horse and knew it had to be him." "Ruth trained that horse, didn't she?" The name sent a cold jolt through Hank's spine. He nodded once, tightly. Around them, the murmurs grew. A few of the older folks recognized Walt. Younger ones just sensed something unspoken hanging in the air. Amelia looked between the two men, confused but alert, like she'd stepped into a scene from a movie she didn't know she was part of. Rusty neighed softly, breaking the tension. Amelia instinctively moved to comfort him, but her eyes stayed locked on her grandfather. "Who is he, Grandpa?" she asked. Hank's lips pressed into a thin line. "He's someone I used to know," he said quietly. Walt's jaw tightened at the understatement, but he let it pass. He wasn't here to reignite old wars, at least not yet. "You used to know me," Walt echoed, "back when we both loved the same woman." The crowd went still again, like the wind itself had paused to listen. Hank shot a glare at Walt, but the damage was done. Amelia's eyes widened. "You loved Grandma?" The truth had hovered for years in whispers, family rumors never confirmed. Now it had surfaced, raw, sharp, and in front of everyone. Hank looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "Things were complicated back then," he muttered. Walter stepped closer to Rusty, brushing a hand gently along the horse's neck. "He remembers," he said, almost to himself. He was just a colt when Ruth used to ride out into the valley, humming that old Patsy Cline song. His voice trailed off, lost in memory. Amelia watched him, a knot growing in her chest. She'd only ever heard Ruth's name spoken with reverence. Now it was tangled in something else entirely. The auctioneer, unsure whether to proceed, cleared his throat. Mr. Donovan, do we continue the bidding?" Hank didn't answer. His eyes were still on Walt. Because the past wasn't done with him. Not yet. And now, neither was Walt McCree. Hank didn't speak as he walked Rusty back to the trailer. His boots crunched against the gravel, but inside, everything was still. Amelia followed a few steps behind, her face pale, her mind spinning. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but the look on her grandfather's face stopped her cold. It wasn't just pain, it was shame, a kind she hadn't seen before. When they reached the truck, Hank opened the trailer door with more force than needed, and Rusty hesitated before stepping inside. He could feel it too. Something was different now. They rode home in silence. The dusty Texas roads wound through golden fields, and the wind outside the window was the only sound between them. Amelia finally broke it. "Is it true? What he said about Grandma?" Her voice was small, but steady. Hank's knuckles tightened on the wheel. "Your grandmother was the best woman I ever knew," he said, eyes locked on the road. "That's the only truth that matters." Amelia looked away, unsatisfied. The silence returned, heavier this time. Back at the ranch, the house felt colder than usual. Rusty was stabled, watered, and quiet. Amelia wandered into the living room and stared at the old photograph above the fireplace. Hank, Ruth, and a young Susan smiling under the big oak tree. Ruth's eyes were alive in the picture. Now they stared back like they knew something no one else did. Hank came in and stood behind her. "There are things I never told you," he said softly, "because I thought I was protecting you. Maybe I was protecting myself." She turned to face him. "From what?" Hank sat down slowly in his old recliner, the leather groaning under him. "Walter McCree and I served together," he began. "We came back from Vietnam with more ghosts than medals. Ruth was working at the VA hospital in Dallas when we met her. Walt loved her first. But she chose me." He paused. "Or maybe she didn't." Amelia sat on the edge of the coffee table, eyes fixed on him. "Are you saying she loved him too?" Hank didn't answer right away. He stared at the photo like it might speak for him. "There were letters," he finally said. "Ones I found after she passed. Letters she never sent. They were addressed to Walt." Amelia's breath caught. This wasn't just about a horse anymore. It was about everything they thought they knew, unraveling. Outside, a truck pulled into the driveway. Hank stood quickly and moved to the window. It wasn't Walt this time. It was someone worse. A man in a suit, stepping out slow and smug. Declan Ford, the banker. And he wasn't here for small talk. Declan Ford's shoes crunched against the gravel as he approached the porch like a man who owned it. Tall, well-groomed, with a crooked smile that never quite reached his eyes. He carried a leather folder under one arm and a kind of arrogance that didn't belong in a place like Sweetwater. Hank opened the door before Declan could knock. "I told you I needed more time," Hank said, his voice rough, defensive. Declan smiled, calm as ever. "And I told you the bank doesn't deal in extensions. Deadlines are deadlines, Mr. Donovan." Amelia stood just behind her grandfather, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She didn't know the full story, but she knew one thing. She didn't trust this man. Declan glanced at her briefly, then back to Hank. "I didn't come to argue. I came to offer an alternative," he said smoothly. He stepped forward uninvited and entered the living room like it belonged to him. The property's equity is low, but the land still has value, to the right people. Hank closed the door slowly behind him, jaw clenched. "You're not touching this land." Declan set the folder on the coffee table with care. "You can't stop the foreclosure, Hank. But you can choose who it goes to. There's a buyer interested. They're offering enough to clear your debts and put a little something in your pocket." Hank's eyes darkened. "Who?" Declan tapped the folder but didn't answer. "Does it matter?" he replied. "It's more than you'll get when the bank seizes it." Amelia looked between them, feeling the weight of the walls closing in. "We're not selling our home," she said. Declan turned to her with an almost pitying look. "Your home is already gone, sweetheart. I'm just giving you a softer landing." Hank didn't answer. He picked up the folder, looked at it, then tossed it back on the table without opening it. "Get off my property," he said quietly. Declan didn't move right away. He studied Hank like a man reading a wounded animal. Then, with a smirk, he straightened his jacket. "You've got 7 days," he said, walking back toward the door. "After that, the bank moves in, with or without your blessing." The screen door slammed shut behind him. As his truck disappeared down the dusty road, Amelia turned to her grandfather. "What are we going to do?" Hank stared out the window for a long moment before answering. "We're going to fight," he said. "But not just for the ranch." He turned slowly toward her, eyes heavy. "I think it's time you knew everything. About your grandmother. About Walter. About you." And somewhere deep in the barn, Rusty let out a long, low whinny, like he, too, knew the past had just kicked open the door. The attic smelled like dust and old pine, with hints of mothballs and faded memories. Hank hadn't been up there in years, not since Ruth passed. The boards creaked beneath his boots as he moved slowly through boxes marked with years in fading marker, 1983, 1990, 2005. Amelia followed quietly, her flashlight beam darting across cobwebs and old trunks. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that Hank said it was time. And something about his voice told her this was bigger than the ranch. Bigger than money. In the far corner, beneath a moth-eaten quilt and a cracked saddle, Hank pulled out a small wooden chest. It was locked, but the key was still tied to the handle with a strip of leather Ruth had braided decades ago. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside, neatly folded and bound with a silk ribbon, were the letters, dozens of them. Yellowed by time, each one was written in Ruth's unmistakable cursive. Amelia leaned in closer as Hank untied the ribbon and pulled out the first envelope. "She wrote to Walt," Hank said, voice low, almost reverent. "I found these after the funeral. I never told anyone. Not even Susan." His hand hovered over the page, but it was Amelia who read it aloud. The words were tender, uncertain, full of longing and guilt. Ruth had loved Hank, but part of her had never let go of Walt. Each letter revealed a woman torn between two men, two versions of her life, one she chose and one she only imagined. Amelia's throat tightened as she read. "She never sent them," Hank said quietly. "Maybe she was afraid. Maybe she thought it was too late. But she kept writing, even after we were married. Even after Susan was born." He sat back against a beam, eyes glazed. "All those years, I thought I knew her heart. Turns out, I only had half of it." Amelia looked at her grandfather and didn't see the proud, stubborn man she'd always known. She saw someone broken, not by time, but by truth. "She still chose you," Amelia said softly. "She stayed." Hank nodded, But the weight of that truth didn't lift the pain. She stayed, but a piece of her never came home. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the wind outside moved, whispering through the rafters like the breath of the past itself. Then, from downstairs, the phone rang. A landline, the kind no one used anymore. Hank and Amelia looked at each other. 3 rings. 4. Then silence. And a voice on the answering machine, low, slow, deliberate. "Hank, it's Walt. We need to talk. It's about Amelia." The message played on repeat in Hank's head long after the machine went silent. "It's about Amelia." Those words landed harder than anything Walt had said in 30 years. Hank sat frozen in the living room, elbows on his knees, his weathered hands locked together. Amelia stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. "Why would he say that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hank didn't answer right away. Because the answer, the one buried for so long, wasn't just painful. It was dangerous. He rose slowly and walked to the cabinet where Ruth had once kept their important documents. Hidden behind birth certificates and property deeds was a thin, sealed envelope marked only with Ruth's initials. He pulled it out with the kind of hesitation a man has when he knows what he's about to open could change everything. "Your grandmother left this for me," he said. "I never opened it. I was afraid of what it might say." Amelia watched as he tore it open, hands trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Ruth's handwriting, steady, graceful, final. The letter was dated just days before her death. In it, she confessed what Hank had long suspected but never had the courage to confront. That she had loved both men. That Walt had come back into her life in secret, and that there was a possibility Amelia wasn't Hank's biological granddaughter. "I don't know for sure," the letter read, "but I see Walt's eyes in her more with each passing day." Amelia stood still, the air around her thinning. "Are you saying Walt might be my grandfather?" Hank looked up at her, tears gathering in the corners of his tired eyes. "I raised you. I held you when you were born. I taught you to ride. I was there when your mama died. I am your grandfather, blood or not." His voice cracked under the weight of it all. Amelia didn't answer. Her world tilted. Questions she didn't know she had were suddenly screaming for answers. The phone rang again. This time, Hank picked it up. Walt's voice came through, rough with age but still steady. "I know what she wrote, and I know what you're feeling. But I need to see her, Hank. She deserves to know the whole story, from me." Hank stared out the window at the barn, where Rusty stood still as a statue, as if waiting for all this to unfold. "I'm listening," Hank said. "But not here." Walt paused, then spoke one word. "Meet me at Ruth's grave." The cemetery sat on a quiet hill overlooking the Donovan ranch, where the grass grew long and the wind always seemed to whisper secrets. It was early morning when Hank pulled his truck onto the gravel path, the sky painted in pale orange and dusty blue. Amelia sat in the passenger seat, silent, staring out the window. She hadn't said much since the night before. She was still reeling, not just from the letter, but from the sudden possibility that her identity wasn't what she had always believed. Walt was already there, standing beside Ruth's headstone, hat in hand. He looked older in the light, not just aged, but worn by regret. The inscription on the stone read simply, "Ruth Hammond Donovan, a heart divided, but always full." Hank noticed it for the first time in years. It hit different now. Amelia stepped out of the truck, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. Walt looked at her with a mix of awe and sorrow. "You look just like her," he said. "Ruth, when she was young." Hank stayed back at first, watching them from a distance. Walt turned to him. "I didn't come here to take anything from you, Hank. I came to tell the truth. Whether she wants to hear it or not, She deserves to know." Amelia looked at them both, eyes sharp. "Then say it. All of it. No more letters. No more secrets." Walt took a deep breath. "Ruth and I were together before the war. We planned to marry. Then I got drafted. I asked her to wait, but she didn't. When I came back, she was already with Hank." He paused, looking down at Ruth's grave. "I was angry. I left. Years later, after Susan was born, Ruth found me. We met once, just once. She said she didn't know who Amelia's father was. But she was scared. She wanted me to know, in case anything ever happened." Amelia's throat tightened. "So what now?" she asked. "You just tell me this and disappear again?" Walt shook his head. "No. I want to know too. I want a test. Not because I need a title, but because I need peace." Hank finally stepped forward. "She's mine whether blood says so or not," he said, voice steady. "But if there's even a chance she came from you, then you deserve the truth too." For a long moment, no one spoke, just the wind rustling through the trees. Then Amelia nodded, slowly. "Okay," she said. "Let's find out. But whatever that test says, my real family is the one that stayed." And somewhere, beneath that quiet hill, Ruth rested, knowing the storm she'd left behind was finally waking. The DNA test was mailed the same afternoon. Simple, clinical, a swab, a signature, and a few days of waiting that felt like years. Back at the ranch, time moved strangely. Amelia tried to stay busy, brushing Rusty, helping with chores, but every quiet moment was filled with what-ifs. She hadn't told anyone at school. Not Caleb, not her teacher, not even Mary Lou at the diner, who always asked too many questions. This wasn't something she could explain. How do you tell someone you might not be who you thought you were? Hank pretended not to care about the test. But Amelia noticed how often he stared out the window, or how long he lingered by Ruth's old chair in the living room. She caught him holding one of the letters again, reading it like it might change, like maybe this time Ruth would write something different. He didn't say much, but his silence said enough. He was scared. Scared of losing something that couldn't be replaced, even after everything. Walt called once. Just once. "Let me know when it comes," he said. "No pressure. I want to be ready." He hadn't tried to push his way in. He didn't show up again at the ranch. That somehow made it harder. He was giving them space, but the kind of space that felt like a goodbye waiting to happen. Amelia didn't know what she wanted the test to say. She just knew that someone was going to hurt either way. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. Thin, unassuming, but it felt like a brick in her hands. Amelia walked into the house, held it out to Hank, and waited. He looked at it, then back at her. "Do you want me to open it?" She hesitated, then nodded. His hands trembled slightly as he tore it open and unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the page slowly, then stopped. Silence. A beat. Two. Then softly, "It's him." Amelia blinked. "Walt." Hank nodded, lowering the paper. "You're his by blood." The words hung in the room like smoke. Amelia didn't cry. She didn't move. She just stood there, trying to feel something, anything, that would explain the weight in her chest. Hank reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "But that doesn't change who raised you. It doesn't change who stayed." His voice cracked. "It doesn't change that I love you." Just as she opened her mouth to answer, the front door swung open. Sheriff Ridley stood there, hat in hand, face tense. "You two need to come with me," he said. "It's Walt. He's been taken to the hospital. Something's wrong. He might not make it through the night." The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and something colder, the kind of sterile stillness that made time feel heavier. Machines beeped softly, counting each second that Walt McCree had left. He lay there pale and quiet, wires tucked under thin sheets, oxygen mask covering part of his face. His chest rose slowly, rhythm broken and labored. When Hank and Amelia stepped in, the nurse gave them a look that said more than words ever could. "He's fading," she whispered. "But he's been asking for you." Amelia walked in first, her boots echoing against the tile. She had never seen Walt this way. He looked smaller, fragile, almost unfamiliar. But when he opened his eyes and saw her, they lit up. "Hey, kid," he rasped, barely above a whisper. "You came." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I got the results." He tried to smile. "I know." His gaze drifted to Hank, who stood in the doorway, arms crossed, unreadable. "Thank you," Walt said, "for raising her right. You did good." Hank stepped closer, reluctantly. "Don't start with gratitude. We both made mistakes." Walt chuckled weakly. "Some bigger than others." There was a long pause between them, but it wasn't bitter. It was heavy with everything they'd never said. "I loved Ruth," Walt continued, "but she loved you differently. I hated that for a long time. But I get it now." Hank didn't respond, but something in his eyes softened, a small release of an old wound that had bled too long. Amelia sat beside the bed, taking Walt's hand gently. "Why did you come back?" she asked. His eyes moved to hers. "Because I didn't want to die not knowing if there was something of me left in this world worth remembering." He coughed, voice fading. "Turns out there is." A tear slipped down her cheek. "You don't have to go. We still have time." But even as she said it, she knew they didn't. The monitor beeped a little slower. Walt looked at Hank one last time. "Take care of her." Hank nodded once. "Like I always have." Walt turned his eyes back to Amelia. "Don't let the past chain you, kid. Use it to ride forward." His last breath came a moment later, not dramatic, not loud. Just a quiet surrender, like the ending of a song no one wanted to finish. Outside, the wind blew through the hospital parking lot like it had across the fields of Sweetwater. And as Amelia stepped out under the fading sky, holding Hank's hand, she knew the final chapter of the past had closed, but the future had just begun to whisper its name. The funeral was small, just as Walt would have wanted. No big speeches, no fuss, just a few people standing around a simple wooden casket beneath a wide Texas sky. Amelia placed a single bluebonnet on top, Ruth's favorite flower. The wind was calm that morning, as if even the land was giving Walt a quiet goodbye. Sheriff Ridley said a few words, nothing fancy, just the truth. He made his peace before the end. Not every man gets to do that. After the service, Hank and Amelia rode back to the ranch in silence. But it wasn't the silence of tension this time. It was the silence of understanding, of something broken being slowly rebuilt. Rusty stood waiting at the gate as they pulled in, lifting his head like he'd known exactly when they'd return. Amelia climbed out of the truck and went straight to him, burying her face in his neck. "We're still here," she whispered, "and we're not going anywhere." That night, Hank pulled a few old photo albums from the closet, the ones he hadn't touched in over a decade. They sat on the living room floor, flipping through pages of black and white memories, laughing quietly at Susan's messy hair as a toddler, Ruth's crooked smile, and one photo in particular. Hank, Walt, and Ruth together in 1972, young, fearless, and unaware of everything that would come. "We all loved her," Hank said softly. "But she belonged to herself. And somehow, she gave a piece of that to each of us." Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder. "I don't know what to call him now. Walt, I mean." Hank looked out the window, where the stars were beginning to come out over the ranch. Call him what he was. A man who cared enough to come back when it mattered most. That's more than a lot of folks ever do. She nodded slowly. She wasn't sure how to carry that truth yet, but she would, in her own time. The next morning, they saddled Rusty and rode out to the far end of the property, where the grass grew wild and untouched. Amelia placed a small wooden marker in the soil. Walt McCree, you came home. It wasn't much, but it was honest. As they rode back toward the house, the wind picked up behind them, strong but warm, pushing them forward across the land that had seen loss, love, and now something like healing. And for the first time in a long time, Hank didn't feel like he was riding with ghosts. He was riding with family, and that changed everything.